Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Mayday, mayday! I was turned into a worm. Today's segment brought to you by weirdness. Sorry, I just wanted to do something weird for my day. Welcome to May 1st, also known as May Day, with many definitions of that particular term. My brain broke from it. Today we're going to talk a little bit of history and trains and whatnots. But before that, because it's May Day, I've chosen a rocket theme for a race. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. All right, there's our rockets all lined up. We're going to go shooting off into space. Maybe. There we go. All right, here we go. We've got She Stole, we've got VS, we've got Visiting, we've got Makeup and Leon, and Bubba, and Cheap, and Derek, and Gypsy, She Stole, and Goat, Lower, Contact, Kenny and Debbie, Really Haunted, Aisha, Mayhem, these I can't make out, Cruising Nuts, Richard, Laura, Kenny and Debbie, let's see, Miss T, Right Touch, Nikki and Happy, Ogden. Ooh, we got Wicked. Hang on. Okay, so this is Wicked Hawk. He is a gamer who is single, has autism, ADHD, and a fan of basketball. He plays a lot of games. He does do a lot of live streaming. His live streams are on a live commentary, which I understand. He's had some trolls, or they have had some trolls. I'm going to say did it say up here? Nope, it does not say up here. Okay, so we're going to go with they. They've had some trolls, so they've had some problems, so I understand them limiting the comments in chat and stuff, so but still good gaming. So if you're into that, check them out. Like, share, comment. Have a good. All right, we did historian. Tell us something.
Well, we took a peek at the May 1st date, and there was a number of odds and ends and historical things to take a play with. One that kind of stuck out in my mind is been in the news recently is Amtrac was founded on May 1st, 1971. Now, Amtrac, by its nature, is the actually a merging of American track, the latter of it a sensational spelling of track, has intercity rail service in 46 of the 48 contiguous U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces. It's clear across the country. The only 2 states that it misses, make a guess.
No.
South Dakota and Wyoming. Also touches British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec in Canada. Now, interestingly enough, the railroad system, as it was, was made up of a predecessor of 20 privately operated intercity passenger rail systems. So it, covers pretty widespread range. The routes take up 21,400 miles.
Wow.
Or 34,400 kilometers. Amtrac itself only owns 623 miles of that stretch. Wow. All the rest of it's private. Now, what wound up happening, let's play with history. Everybody loves history.
No.
Okay. When you first think about transportation in America back in the 1800s, a lot of it dealt with river traffic, wagon systems. But the trains, the advent of the railroad, we've discussed it in other videos. The railroad pretty much is what helped this country grow. The Oregon Trail worked for a number of years until the locomotives started making it go that much faster. I mean, would you rather spend, 3 months bouncing along in a wagon or 3 days, highballing it on the Intercontinental Railroad? It was a pretty simple, stretch. But what wound up happening, okay, in 1916, to give you an idea, 1916, 98% of all commercial intercity travelers in the U.S. moved by rail. 98%.
Wow.
That is a tight number. Last 2% were moved by interland waterways.
Very nice.
Okay. Now, 42 million passengers were using railroads as the primary transportation. If you were going to go from Boston to New York to D.C., D.C. down to Atlanta, Atlanta down to, Miami, you were bouncing on railroads. If you wanted to go over to Chicago, take the railroad. You wanted to go to Detroit, railroad. St. Louis, In fact, cutting across South Dakota, the railroads helped set up towns, helped move people into Homestead, and as the states grew from coast to coast, railroads helped develop the towns. Well, as the 20th century progressed, a couple things changed all that. The first one was buses. People want to hop the bus and travel from big city to big city. And the downfall for the railroad there was that whereas a bus could go on those side roads and go up and see other towns, the railroads are kind of locked into their own track, which, if you think about it, railroad goes 1 to 2 directions most of the time, forward and backwards.
Right. Very limiting.
Yeah, unless you have a side route, and, beside the point. Air travel. Invention of the airplane started changing things up too. The old DCs and stuff that, could take people across oceans. Railroads couldn't do that. The car. Everybody in America seems to have at least one car, if not 2 or 3. Because they, gave us mobility. If you wanted to take and go from, say, Wall, South Dakota to Lemon, you can't take the railroad unless you go all the way back to Minnesota and come up and over. And both those lanes, both those railroads, don't take passengers anymore. Well, what wound up happening was that now they tried to make some adjustments using streamlined diesel-powered trains like the Pioneer Zephyr, which were popular with the traveling public, but they couldn't reverse the trend of declining usage. By 1940, the railroads were down to 67% of commercial passenger miles. In real terms, the passenger miles had fallen by 40% since 1916, from 42 billion to only 25 billion. That's a big cut.
That is a big cut.
Now, when World War II happened, there was a switch out because traffic surged with troop movement, gasoline rationing. The railroads market surged back to 74% in 45, with a massive 94 billion passenger miles. Well, after the war, though, the railroads rejuvenated their overworked and neglected passenger fleets with new and luxurious streamliners, these new trains brought only temporary relief to the overall decline, though. As post-war travel exploded, passenger travel percentages of the overall market share fell by 46% in 1950 and then 32% by 1957. The
Wow.
railroads had lost money on passenger service since the Great Depression, but the deficits reached $723 billion by 1957. For many railroads, these losses threatened financial viability. Here in South Dakota, we used to have passenger service from Minnesota all the way to Rapid City, and then I think it was in 1960, the Milwaukee line, which was one of our primary passenger lines to Rapid, ceased passenger service. They still had bulk rail, freight, but yeah, you wouldn't be able to take a train anymore after 1960. Now, debates happened, the causes of this decline. Some people blamed it on the national highway system and airports, both funded by the government, competing directly with the railroads, which paid their own infrastructure. In Milwaukee, they did not do a lot of maintenance on their lines. I guess when they decided in '88 to try to restart the Milwaukee line, there were spots where they said the train could only go 2 miles an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you're not setting any land speed records there.
Go fast.
Yeah.
I can walk faster.
Yeah, no kidding. Hop out. Here we go. American car culture also gave rise to the post-war years. Progressive era rate regulations also limited the railroad's ability to turn a profit. If you can't turn a profit, you're not going to make any business.
Right.
Railroads also faced antiquated work rules and inflexible relationships with the trade unions. To take one example, workers continued to receive a day's pay for 100 to 150 mile work days, while streamliners would cover that in only 2 hours. Well, matters approached the crisis in the 1960s. Passenger service route miles fell from 107,000 miles in 1958 to 49,000 miles in 1970, the last full year of private operation. Now, the diversion of most U.S. Postal Service Department mail from passenger trains to trucks, airplanes, and freight, late 1967 deprived those trains of badly needed revenue.
Right.
Now, in direct response, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway filed to discontinue 33 of its remaining 39 trains, ending almost all passenger service on one of the largest railroads in the country. The equipment the railroads had ordered after World War II was now 20 years old, worn out, and in need of replacement. Well, as this passenger service declined, various proposals were brought forward to rescue it. The 1961 Doyle Report proposed that private railroads pool their services into a single body. Similar proposals were made in 1965 and 68, but failed to attract support. The federal government passed a High-Speed Ground Transportation Act in 1965 to fund pilot programs in the Northeast Corridor, but this did not address the passenger deficits. The 1969 multiple proposals emerged in the United States Congress, including equipment subsidies, route subsidies, and lastly a quasi-public corporation to take over the operation of intercity passenger trains. Matters were brought to a head on June 21st, 1970, when the Penn Central, the largest railroad in the northeastern United States and teetering on bankruptcy, filed to discontinue 34 of its passenger trains.
Wow.
Well, in October 1970, Congress passed and the President Nixon signed into law the Rail Passenger Service Act. Now, proponents of the bill, led by the National Association of Railroad Passengers, or NARP, sought government funding. Sought government funding to ensure the continuation of passenger trains. They conceived a National Railroad Passenger Corporation, a quasi-public corporation that would be managed as a for-profit organization but would receive taxpayer funding and assume operation of intercity passenger trains. Now, there were several key provisions. The first was any railroad any railroad operating intercity passenger service could contract with the NRPC, thereby joining the national system. The United States federal government, through the Secretary of Transportation, would own all of the NRPC's issued and outstanding preferred stock. Participating railroads bought into the NRPC using a formula based on their recent intercity passenger losses. The purchase price could be satisfied either by cash or rolling stock. In exchange, the railroads received NRPC common stock. Any participating railroad was freed from the obligation to operate intercity passenger service after May 1st, 1971, except for those services chosen by the Department of Transportation as part of a basic system of service and paid for by NRPC using its federal funds. Now, railroads that chose not to join the NRPC system were required to continue operating their existing passenger service until 1975, at which time they could pursue the customary ICC approval process for any discontinuance or alteration to the service. Now, of the 26 railroads still offering intercity passenger service in 1970, only 6 declined to join the NRPC. Now, the original working brand name for the NRPC was Railpacks, but less than 2 weeks before operations began, the official marketing name was changed to Amtrac, a portmanteau of the words America and tracks, the latter itself a sensational spelling of track. Nearly everyone involved expected the experiment to be short-lived. The Nixon administration and many Washington insiders viewed the NRPC as a politically expedient way for the President and Congress to give passenger trains a last hurrah as demanded by the public. They expected the NRPC to quietly disappear as public interest waned. After Fortune magazine exposed the manufacturer mismanagement in 1974, Lewis W. Mink, chairman of the Burlington Northern Railroad, remarked that the story was undermining the scheme to dismantle Amtrak. Proponents also hoped that the government intervention would be brief and that Amtrak would soon be able to support itself. Neither view proved to be correct, for popular support allowed Amtrak to continue in operation longer than critics imagined, while the financial results made passenger train service returning to private railroad operations infeasible. We spend a lot of money keeping Amtrak running.
Right.
Tax money.
No, we spend a lot of money making lots of things run, like Postal Service.
Especially the Postal Service.
Now, just saying.
Yeah. Now, again, as we mentioned, Amtrak began operations on May 1st, 1971. Amtrak received no rail tracks or rights of way at its inception. All Amtrak routes were continuations of prior service, although Amtrak pruned about half of the passenger rail network. Of the 366 train routes that operated previously, Amtrak continued only 184. Several major corridors became freight only, including the ex-New York City Railroad's water level route from New York to Ohio and the Grand Trunk Western Railroad from Chicago to Detroit route. The reduced passenger train schedules created confusion among staff. At some stations, Amtrak service was available only late at night or early in the morning, prompting complaints from passengers. Disputes with freight railroads over track usage caused some services to be rerouted, temporarily canceled, or replaced with buses. On the other hand, the creation of the Los Angeles-Seattle Coast Starlight from 3 formerly separate train routes was an immediate success, resulting in an increase to daily service by 1973.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Needing to only operate half the train routes that were operated previously, Amtrak would lease about 1,200 of its best passenger cars from the 3,000 that private railroads owned. All were air-conditioned, and 90% were easy-to-maintain stainless steel. I wish to inform people that these were what the Bud cars were.
Yes, we are related to a bunch of cars. No, just kidding.
Just kidding. Actually, it was kind of funny because they were all aluminum, and they actually have some of them at 1880 train, and they also have a couple at the 1880 town.
Right.
One of our latest and greatest inventions from the old days. Now, when Amtrak took over, passenger cars and locomotives initially retained the paint schemes and logos of their former owners, which resulted in Amtrak running trains with mismatched colors, the Rainbow Era. In mid-1971, Amtrak began purchasing some of the equipment it had leased, including 286 EMD E and F unit diesel locomotives, 30 GG1 electric locomotives, and 1,290 passenger cars. By 1975, the official Amtrak color scheme was painted on most of the Amtrak equipment and newly purchased locomotives, and the rolling stock began appearing. Now, Amtrak inherited problems with train stations, most notably deferred maintenance, as we call them, abandoned, and redundant facilities from competing railroads that once served the same communities. Chicago is a prime example. The day prior to Amtrak's inception, intercity passenger trains used 4 different Chicago terminals at LaSalle, Dearborn, Northwestern Station, Central, and Union. These trains at LaSalle remained there as their operator, Rock Island, could not afford to opt into Amtrak. Of all the trains serving the Dearborn station, Amtrak retained only a pair of Santa Fe trains, which relocated to the Union Station, beginning with the first Amtrak departures on May 1st, 1971. The Dearborn station closed after the last pre-Amtrak trains on the Santa Fe arrived in Chicago on May 2nd. None of the intercity trains that served the Northwestern station became part of the Amtrak system, and that terminal became commuter only after May 1st. The trains serving Central Station continued to use that station until an alternate routing was adopted in March of 1972. In New York City, Amtrak had to maintain 2 stations, the Penn and the Grand Central, due to a lack of track connections to bring trains from upstate New York to Penn Station, a problem that was rectified once the Empire connection was built in 1991. The Amtrak Standard Stations program was launched in 1978 and proposed to bring a standardized station design across the system with an aim to reduce costs, speed construction, and improve its corporate image. However, the cash-strapped railroad would ultimately build relatively few of these standard stations. Now, Amtrak soon had the opportunity to acquire rights-of-way following the bankruptcy of several northeastern railroads in the early 1970s, including Penn Central, which owned and operated the Northeast Corridor. Congress passed the Railroad Revitalization and Regulatory Reform Act of 1976. A large part of this legislation was directed to the creation of Conrail, but the law also enabled the transfer of portions of the NEC not already owned by state authorities to Amtrak. Amtrak acquired the majority of the NEC on April 1st, 1976. The portion in Massachusetts is owned by the Commonwealth and managed by Amtrak. The route from New Haven to New Rochelle is owned by the New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority and the Connecticut Department of Transportation as the New Haven line. This main line became Amtrak's dual asset and helped the railroad generate revenue. While the NEC ridership and revenues were higher than any other segment of the system, the cost of operating and maintaining the corridor proved to be overwhelming. As a result, Amtrak's federal subsidy was increased dramatically. In subsequent years, other short route segments not needed for freight operations were transferred to Amtrak. Now, in its first decade, Amtrak fell far short of financial independence, which continues today, but it did find modest success in rebuilding trade. Outside factors discouraged competing transport, such as fuel shortages and increased costs of automobile and airline travel, and strikes which disrupted airline operations. Investments in Amtrak's track, equipment, and information also made Amtrak more relevant to America's transportation needs. Amtrak's ridership increased from 16.6 million in 1972 to 21 million in 1981. In February of 1978, Amtrak moved its headquarters to 400 North Capitol Street, West, Washington, D.C. Well, in 1982, the Secretary of Navy and retired Southern Railway head William Graham Claytor Jr. came out of retirement to lead Amtrak. During his time at Southern, Claytor was a vocal critic of Amtrak's prior managers, who all came from non-railroading backgrounds.
Well then.
Transportation Secretary Drew Lewis cited this criticism as a reason why the Democrat Claytor was acceptable to the Reagan White House. Despite frequently clashes with the Reagan administration over funding, Clayton enjoyed a good relationship with Lewis, John H. Riley, the head of the Federal Railroad Administration, and with members of Congress. Limited funding led Claytor to use a short-term debt to fund operations. Building on mechanical developments in the 1970s and high-speed Washington to New York Metroliner service was improved with new equipment and faster schedules. Travel time between New York and D.C. was reduced to under 3 hours due to system improvements and limited stop service. This improvement was cited as a reason why Amtrak grew its share of intercity trips between the cities along the corridor. Elsewhere in the country, demand for passenger rail service resulted in the creation of 5 new state-supported routes in California, Illinois, Missouri, Oregon, and Pennsylvania, for a total of 15 state-supported routes. Amtrak added 2 new trains in 1983, the California Zephyr between Oakland and Chicago via Denver, and revived the Auto Train, a unique service that carries both passengers and their vehicles. Amtrak advertised it as a great way to avoid traffic along the I-95 running between Lorton, Virginia, near D.C., and Sanford, Florida, near Orlando, on the Silver Star alignment. In the 80s and 90s, stations in Baltimore, Chicago, and D.C. received major rehabilitation, and the Empire Connection Tunnel opened in 1991, allowing Amtrak to consolidate all New York services at Penn Station. Now, despite the improvements, Amtrak's ridership stagnated at roughly 20 million passengers per year amid uncertain government aid from 1981 to about 2000. In the early 1990s, Amtrak tested several different high-speed trains from Europe on the Northeast Corridor. An X2000 train was leased from Sweden for test runs from October 1992 to January 1993, followed by revenue service between Washington, D.C. and New York from February to May and August to September of 1993. Now, seen to show the ICE-1 train from Germany, organizing the ICE Train North America Tour, which started to operate on the Northeast Corridor in July 3, 1993. Also in 1993, Thomas Downs succeeded Claytor as Amtrak's 5th president. The slated goal remained operational self-sufficiency. By this time, however, Amtrak had a large overhang of debt from years of underfunding. In the mid-1990s, Amtrak suffered through a serious cash crunch. Under Downs, Congress included a provision of the Taxpayer Relief Act of 1997 that resulted in Amtrak receiving a $2.3 billion tax refund that resolved their cash crisis. However, Congress also instituted a glide path to financial self-sufficiency, excluding Railroad Retirement Tax Act payments. Now, George Washington became the 6th president in 1998 with a mandate to make Amtrak financially self-sufficient.
Well then.
Oh, Warrington, not Washington.
See, wait a minute, what?
Yeah. Under Warrington, the company tried to expand into express freight shipping, placing Amtrak in competition with the host freight railroads and the trucking industry. On March 9th, 1999, Amtrak unveiled its plan for the Azalea Express, a high-speed train on the Northeast Corridor between D.C. and Boston. Several changes were made to the corridor to make it suitable for higher-speed electric trains. The North End Electrification Project extended existing electrification from New Haven, Connecticut, to Boston to complete an overhead power supply along the 454-mile route, and several grade crossings were improved or removed. Now, ridership did increase during the first decade of the 21st century after implementation of capital improvements of the NEC and rises in automobile fuel costs. The inauguration of the high-speed Alicia in the late 2000s generated considerable publicity and led to major ridership gains. However, through the late 1990s and early 21st century, Amtrak could not add sufficient express freight revenue or cut sufficient other expenditures to break even. By 2002, it was clear that Amtrak could not achieve self-sufficiency, but Congress continued to authorize funding and released Amtrak from the requirement. By early 2002, David L. Gunn replaced Warrington as the 7th president. In a departure from his predecessor's promises to make Amtrak self-sufficient in the short term, Gunn argued that no form of passenger transportation in the United States is self-sufficient as the economy is currently structured. Highways, airports, and air traffic control all require large government expenditures to build and operate, coming from the Highway Trust Fund and the Aviation Trust Fund, paid for by user fees, highway fuel, and road taxes, and, in the case of the General Fund, from general taxation. Gunn dropped most of the freight express business and worked to eliminate deferred maintenance. A plan by the Bush administration to privatize parts of the national passenger rail system and spin off other parts of the partial state ownership provoked disagreement within Amtrak's board of directors. Late in 2005, Gunn was fired.
Oh, no.
Gunn's replacement, Alexander Kumatant, was committed to operating a national rail network and, like Gunn, opposed the notion of putting the Northeast Corridor under separate ownership. He said that shedding the system's long-distance routes would amount to selling national assets that are on par with national parks, and that Amtrak's abandonment of these routes would be irreversible.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
In late 2006, Amtrak unsuccessfully sought annual congressional funding of $1 billion for 10 years. Sheesh.
That's a little bit of money.
Yeah. In early 2007, Amtrak employed 20,000 people in 46 states and served 25 million passengers a year, its highest amount since founding in 1970. Politico noted a key problem. The rail system chronically operates in the red. A pattern has emerged. Congress overrides cutbacks demanded by the White House and appropriates enough funds to keep Amtrak from plunging into insolvency. But Amtrak advocates say that is enough to fix the system's woes. Kind of reminds me of the Civic Center, because for years we would, keep pumping money into the Civic Center, and for some reason we could never get them off the skid.
Yeah, I still don't know if it's out of the red or
No.
out of the... Yeah,
and of course,
out of the red, that's right.
Yeah, and of course nobody wants to admit that there's a problem because they're on the take. Anyway, now Joseph H. Boardman replaced Kumatant as president and CEO in late 2008. In 2011, Amtrak announced its intention to improve and expand the high-speed rail corridor from Penn Station to New York City under the Hudson River in new tunnels and double-tracking the line from Newark, New Jersey, called the Gateway Program, initially estimated to cost $13.5 billion, or equal to $18 billion in 2023. From May 2011 to May 2012, Amtrak celebrated its 40th anniversary with festivals across the country that started on the National Train Day, which is May 7th, 2011.
Well then.
A commemorative book titled Amtrak, An American Story was published. I might even have that book over there.
Maybe.
A documentary was created, 6 locomotives were painted in Amtrak's 4 prior paint schemes, and an exhibit train toured the country, visiting 45 communities and welcoming more than 85,000 visitors. After years of almost revolving door CEOs at Amtrak, in December of 2013, Boardman was named Railroader of the Year by Railway Age magazine.
I want to know how many people were out for it.
No kidding.
There can't be that many railroaders in that time.
No.
Even in that time, I should say.
Yeah. Which noted with over 5 years on the job, he is the second longest serving head of the Amtrak since it was formed more than 40 years ago. On December the 9th, 2015, Boardman announced in a letter to employees that he would be leaving
Goodbye!
Amtrak in September of 2016. He had advised Amtrak Board of Directors that his decision the previous week, on August 19, 2016, the Amtrak Board of Directors named former Norfolk Southern Railway President and CEO Charles Wick Moorman as Boardman's successor with the effective date of September 1st, 2016. During his term, Moorman took no salary and said that he saw his role as one of a transitional CEO who would reorganize Amtrak before turning it over to new leadership. In November 17, 2016, the Gateway Program Development Corporation was formed for the purpose of overseeing and effectuating the rail infrastructure improvements known as the Gateway Program. The GDC is a partnership of the states of New York and New Jersey and Amtrak. The Gateway Program includes the Hudson Tunnel Project to build a new tunnel under the Hudson River and rehabilitate the existing old tunnel, and the Portal North Bridge to replace the century-old movable bridge with a modern structure that is less prone to failure. Later projects of the Gateway Program, including the expansion of track and platforms of the Penn Station, New York, construction of the Bergen Loop, and other improvements, will roughly double the capacity of Amtrak and the New York Transit trains for the busiest, most complex section of the Northwest Corridor. Now, the most recent event that has happened, probably in like the last 30 years, the government has actually come up with an idea, and they put out requests for ideas where they want to run train lines for Amtrak. And, obviously we've spoken on this. South Dakota has been bypassed for passenger service, which kind of sucks because they used to have really good service between a lot of our smaller towns. Of course, first they did away with passenger service, and then when the Milwaukee Road line went into bankruptcy in 1980, it pretty much sealed the fate. Now, the interesting part of it is that they said that there's two lines that they are in consideration of doing. One would go from the Twin Cities through South Dakota. It would hook up with Sioux Falls, Pierre, Rapid, go into Nebraska, cut over into Wyoming, down past Cheyenne, and down to Denver. For the first time in years, I would actually be able to ride on a train as a passenger. I've done the 1880 train up in the hills, enjoyed the heck out of it. But this would be really cool to actually be able to do that. The other route that they were talking about doing would be, again, the Twin Cities. It would go south. I don't think they would go through Sioux Falls. I think it goes all the way to Omaha, down to Kansas City, and then cuts across.
Right.
Which, again, would bypass South Dakota completely, which I think is,
Why not?
Why would we want to do this? But it's ideas that they are considering. They have people put in a comment section, which I went ahead and took part in. Because, the big thing that South Dakota thrives on is our tourism. Back when the Milwaukee Road was open, as they called it, one of its lines went right through the Badlands, which would be an awesome way to view them. I could see it going down, through Buffalo Gap, down to Shattered, over to Crawford, maybe down to Scottsbluff, into Wyoming. There's a lot of different routes that they could take and make a benefit of them. This other route that they're talking about sounds like it would actually be following the Burlington Northern line, which is straight freight right now. But all I can say is we'll see what happens in the next 3 to 5 years. Stay tuned, and we'll see if we find out anything new. But this has been Joe from the Bud Files, the Bearded Historian. Folks, have fun, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.